So taking a look at Alexander Hamilton's writings in Federalist number 68, and this is on the topic of the mode of electing the president. And really the justification here is why the Electoral College was created. And really, when you look at this, it's interesting. It's one of the few kind of areas as you read the Federalist Papers where there didn't seem to be a whole lot of controversy surrounding the creation of the Electoral College. In fact, reading directly from Hamilton here, he says, "I venture somewhat further and hesitate not to affirm that if the manner of it be not perfect, it is at least excellent." So in essence, what Hamilton's saying here is, look, we think we got a pretty good plan as to why we should elect the president this manner, and let me develop the reasons why. And he's pretty satisfied with himself by the time he actually finishes talking about this. So in looking at this, what we see is that he says we need a Republican institution here. We need a president that is in some way ratified or chosen through the consent of the people. And he makes the argument the sense of the people should operate in the choice of the president. However, that idea there is indirectly. And what you really don't get too much in this Federalist paper is a discussion of why they don't want direct election. Now, if you go back to other Federalist papers, the idea of direct election is discussed in a little bit more detail, so you can focus in on the fact that, at this point in time, we really didn't have a national media. People might not be familiar with people outside of their own small areas or their states. So the idea here is that we would create a brand new body called an Electoral College. And according to Hamilton, this is a quote unquote small number of persons selected by their fellow citizens from the general mass who will be most likely to possess the information and discernment requisite to so complicated an investigation, i.e. that investigation of who should be the president of the United States. And Hamilton makes the argument here that it's necessary to have this kind of elite body choosing who the president is, given the powers that the president does have, and given the concerns about executive power that we have. So looking at just kind of a model of the way that the president is chosen, earlier on in the Federalist Papers, we see Madison go through and talk about whether or not institutions are small, are Republican in nature. In other words, do the people have some say over those people that become our elected officials and make our laws? And what we see here is that indirectly, the Electoral College is a Republican institution. So the citizens vote for the members of the Electoral College, and then the Electoral College is the ones that vote for the actual president. There's an intervening variable if there's not a majority, which is the House of Representatives gets involved, but we'll talk about that in the next slide. So looking at this, when we focus on how the Electoral College works, each state gets the combined number of senators that they have for their state with the amount of members of the House of Representatives. So a state like Delaware, which has always had one member of the U.S. House and 2 senators, gets 3 electoral votes. Other larger states over the years have gotten more or less members of the Electoral College, depending on advancing or declining populations. Just to give you an example of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania had 20 electoral votes, 20 electoral votes at this time around, because we have 18 members of the House of Representatives and 2 senators, but the last census, there were 21. So in order to win the Electoral College, you need to have a majority of those, and currently that would take 270 electoral votes. Now let's take a look at why they created this. So in looking at the structure of the Electoral College, the founders were interested in creating a brand new body that would be the ones that are voting for the president. And again, some of their thinking is kind of related to this idea of separation of powers. That we don't want to have people that are already in another branch of government, whether it would be in the judicial system or whether it would be in one of the 2 houses of Congress, picking who the president would be, because that would be a violation of checks and balances. and might make the president behooving to them. So the Electoral College is a body created of people that have been elected by the people, and those people may not be members of the federal government, whether that is, in some capacity in the executive branch, judicial branch, or in the legislative branch. So there are people who are not part of the government, again, on the checks and balances side. A second kind of aspect of this is that the Electoral College is held simultaneously in all 50 states. The idea was that there would not be one body that would meet in the national capital, because if that were the case, what we might see is, one individual or national conspiracy could go on, in which case somebody would fire things up and get people's passions raised. And all these people at the Electoral College might be swept away by a candidate who was really a demagogue. So the idea was, if you meet in each one of the state capitals and have the people in those individual state capitals forward a person that they would recommend for president, you would not have the possibility of, as we see quite a few times in the Federalist Papers, this idea of intrigue. So that was the idea. So all, as it stands right now, the 50 states, when it comes time for the electors to meet, they meet separately in their own state capitals. Now, the last thing here is, one of the things is there may not be a person who, captures the national majority or captures the national, fancy, so to speak, or one person that might not stand out above other people. So there's a secondary mechanism that's being used in the Electoral College. So if a majority of the electors pick one person, that president automatically becomes president. However, if no one person gets a majority of the electoral votes, the top 5 candidates, in other words, those people receiving the top most votes of electors, are then sent to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives chooses the president. Now, this is somewhat interesting here. Hamilton, in one way, says this is a good thing, right? Because the House is going to pick from a slate of candidates that have been chosen by these electors, and these should be 5 very qualified people, and it's a nice slate of candidates to have to pick from, where they can pick the most qualified person. What Hamilton doesn't get into is really a discussion as to the controversy surrounding why it would be okay for the House of Representatives to actually pick the president, which by and large, remember, as we go back, we don't want to rely on existing bodies because existing bodies could be tampered with, right? And as a consequence of that, the checks and balances argument seems to fall by the wayside as Hamilton goes through here, and some of his arguments kind of fall on their face, internally, because, if the House gets to pick, in the case of there not being majority of electors voting for one person, and Hamilton's kind of circumspect, saying that this might happen, every now and again, isn't that in and of itself a violation of separation of powers and checks and balances? So that's the idea behind the Electoral College, and that's kind of Hamilton's notion of why he thought that it was a good idea. But again, remember that this is not, for the most part, anything that was overly controversial at this point in time. Yeah, that was horrible.